If you've ever been betrayed and wanted to see the world level the score for you, listen close. This is the story of how I turned the worst day of my life into the cleanest, coldest kind of justice. Not with violence, but with one weapon men rarely respect: paperwork, patience, and the law. Welcome to Behind Closed Doors.
Odd?
They say marriages die slow deaths, but ours ended in one hot, humiliating instant. I found him in an embrace I'd never imagined. Not with some coworker, not some long-term secret, but with a woman I later learned he paid for. He was sloppy, drunk on something that loosened his conscience. He didn't see me open the door. He didn't see the look on my face. That's the last image he would ever see that wasn't staged to deceive. "Is this some kind of joke?" I whispered. For a second he froze, then rolled, then lied. That's what made it worse. The casual, practiced shrug, the attempt to normalize the grotesque. He told me we were still married. He told me he loved me. The woman dressed herself and left like it was business as usual. The marriage ended the day I caught them red-handed. I moved out. I told myself I was done with drama. I told myself the simplest path was the clean break: sign the papers, walk away. I tried to get divorced. I served papers. He laughed in our kitchen at a time when I had every right to break plates. Then, life inverted. He lost his job. I lost mine. The safety net I had built, steady pay, a small saving, a routine, vanished in 2 months. The world narrowed to unpaid bills, rejection letters, and the hum of fluorescent lights in interview rooms where my past suddenly mattered less than my exhausted eyes. And then he moved back into my apartment. Not as a partner, not as a repentant man. He moved in like a house guest who forgot he was supposed to leave. He took over the couch, the remote, the kitchen, the Wi-Fi. He ate my food, ignored the mess he made, and this was the part that cut me more than the infidelity. He didn't contribute a penny. He acted like we were back to 2018, like the day at the bakery when we first met and everything was lighter. In my mind, the marriage had ended. In his, apparently, it was an unpaid subscription he could still draw from. At first, I tried confrontation. I told him to leave. He told me I was dramatic. I changed the locks. He called the landlord, played the sympathetic part. "She moved out. I'm just crashing. We'll work it out." And the landlord, well, landlords always prefer no conflict. He let him stay. That's when the idea of revenge stopped being vengeance for vengeance's sake and became necessary. To recover the life he'd trampled, to reclaim financial stability he was pillaging, to make him pay in a way that wasn't physical, petty, or illegal. I wasn't interested in scandal. I was interested in a ledger, clear, exact, and consequential. Step 1, collect everything. When you want to win a fight in a courtroom, or even at a mediation table, you start by showing receipts. I started doing what lawyers call discovery on my own. I pulled every document I had: bank statements, credit card bills, rent receipts, the original marriage certificate, screenshots of messages, the divorce papers I'd already filed, photographs of the night I caught him. If he'd used our joint cards, I traced those charges. If he was drawing from accounts we'd opened together, I flagged them. I created a single folder on my laptop labeled in cold capital letters: proof. This step felt petty and precise, and it kept me busy when the nights got loud. Sorting numbers is a different kind of revenge. Slower, surgical, less cinematic, but it has teeth. A case built on data is a case the other side cannot pretend is subjective. I also started recording interactions whenever I could. Not the "I'll get you" kind of recording. The "I need evidence if this goes to court" kind. He made promises, always promises, and so I saved them. When he said he would pay rent next week or help look for a job, I saved the texts. When he agreed to move out with a supposed date, I saved the email. When he lied for the 10th time, I had it in black and white. Step 2, get professional help: a lawyer and an accountant. I knew my limits. I wasn't going to try to muscle through divorce law solo. I found a divorce attorney who didn't do melodrama. She was a woman in her 50s with a voice like gravel and the patience of someone who had seen men try to manipulate the system. She asked me simple, precise questions: joint assets, bank accounts, who was on the lease, whose name was on utilities, whether there were children, whether he had control of any of my professional accounts. I answered honestly, even when the truth made me look like a mess. Honesty is currency in legal battles. She recommended a forensic accountant. That felt dramatic at first. Forensic like a crime show. But once I read the first itemized report, I understood why. The accountant traced transactions I never expected to see. Small withdrawals here, cash advances there, a recurring charge to a dating app I didn't know existed. He'd been bleeding our joint accounts in little, systematic cuts while leaning on the idea that because the marriage hadn't been officially dissolved, he could spend like a man with no consequences. The forensic report became the backbone of my case. It allowed my lawyer to submit preliminary injunctions and requests for emergency relief, freeze joint accounts, prevent him from selling shared assets, and, crucially, compel him to show proof of his income. The court responded. The judge stepped in with an order. Suddenly, the freeloading couch guest felt a chill. Not because I wanted to be cruel, because the law noticed when one spouse was taking advantage of the other, especially during separation. Step 3, force the problem into public legal proceedings. He'd always preferred private manipulation. Gaslighting, excuses, staged remorse. The best way I found to stop him was to stop playing by his rules. I filed for separation with full financial disclosure demands. I reopened certain paperwork, the marriage, the bank accounts, the property deeds. This stuff, when pulled into the court's light, turned murky excuses into formal violations. At our first hearing, he showed up unprepared. He tried to play the fool. I had no idea, he said. He blinked at the packet of documents my lawyer slid across the table, the forensic report on top. The judge peered over glasses and asked him simple questions about where the money went. He stammered, "You can't muscle a judge with charm. You can't seduce a ledger." The judge ordered temporary spousal support. The court froze a portion of our joint checking account pending final settlement. The landlord, who had been sympathetic to his sob story, was now bound by a legal order to recognize me as the primary tenant. The scales tipped inch by inch, paperwork by paperwork. The courtroom was not cinematic. It was bureaucratic, but it was effective. Step 4, convert legal leverage into financial leverage. Once the court issued orders, I used them. The freeze on the joint account meant he could not access the funds he'd been siphoning. The judge's temporary spousal support meant he was required to contribute to rent and utilities. When he failed to make payments, I documented it. When he paid late, I saved the dates. Late payments in a court case become a pattern. Patterns become leverage. I negotiated. I demanded payment plans that fit my needs. I used the threat of contempt, the idea that he could be jailed for willful disobedience, as a lever. He bristled at the first mention of contempt. Men who lie about responsibility do not like the sober reality of enforcement. He began to pay. Not all at once. Not willingly, but he paid. Step 5, hold him publicly accountable. Legally, not viciously. I did not want to destroy him as a person. I wanted to stop him from destroying me financially and emotionally. So I used avenues that are dull and effective. Collection notices, court motions, and a final settlement that included a portion of his income, redirected to me until debts were cleared. I also contacted companies where his freeloading mattered. He had subscriptions under our names. I provided documentation to those providers who closed the accounts or transferred responsibility. I submitted affidavits when necessary. These were small bureaucratic victories. The subscription cut, the card canceled, but they compounded. Every closed account tightened his access. There was one particularly shrewd legal move that turned the tide. I asked the court to recognize our shared finances as they actually were. Joint accounts, seized. Joint credit cards, canceled. Joint investments, valued and frozen. If something was in both our names, the court made sure it couldn't be stealth sold. That simple legal recognition protected me from the kind of quiet theft he'd been practicing. Step 6, take the high road in public. Keep emotion separate from strategy. This is hard. I crave the public shaming, the social media call-out, the dramatic expose. I thought about it often, but revenge through humiliation is messy, unpredictable, and often illegal. I wanted results I could sleep with. So I kept my narrative private, where consequences could be reckless and public. I let the law do the exposing where necessary. This refusal to dramatize my pain made my moves cleaner. It kept sympathy, and the Judges' attention on the facts instead of the spectacle. People expect drama in betrayal stories. Courts expect evidence. Step 7. Rebuild, small and steady. By the time the final settlement came, I had claimed back some money, established a court-ordered support structure, and forced him to take responsibility for a portion of the debts he'd accumulated while freeloading. He paid until the balance was settled. He contributed to rent and bills until the separation was final. He was ordered to vacate the apartment and give back certain items that belonged to me. The landlord changed the locks. He left like a man whose options had narrowed to the width of his backpack. Seeing the movers take boxes out of my living room felt like a climatic scene. But the true climax of revenge, the one that mattered, came later. When my monthly bank deposit arrived without him touching it, when my credit score stopped tumbling, when I had control over my own bills and could plan for the future. That is the cold revenge of a woman who refused to let an imposter live on the terms of her life. Climactic payoff are not a punch, but a balance sheet. There is no satisfying cinematic moment with dramatic music and an antagonist on his knees. My climax was quieter. It was a letter from the court confirming the final settlement. He was to repay a portion of debts, surrender the apartment keys, and sign over responsibility for joint accounts. It was a notification from the bank that an account freeze had been lifted because the debts had been properly assigned. It was an email from a former mutual friend. He wanted to know how I'd done it. It was watching him pack his life into boxes and stare back at me as the elevator swallowed him. "Why are you looking at me?" I said once when he paused on the stairs as if the game wasn't over yet. "You can't," he started. "I already won," I said. "You just didn't notice the scoreboard." His reaction was pure human: anger, humiliation, and beneath it, a small, grudging understanding that the rules had changed. The emotional release was not a scream. It was a long, steady breath as the room stopped, spinning, and I realized I could sleep in my bed without listening for the telltale pat of his footsteps at 2 a.m. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my forensic report, the final court paperwork, and a coffee that tasted like ash and iron. I wasn't happy, exactly. Betrayal leaves a hunger that legal victories don't fill. But I felt powerful again. I felt safe in a way I hadn't since the find. That safety was the payoff, a legal restoration of what he'd tried to take. What I learned, the practical truths. 1. Evidence is a weapon. Keep receipts. Screenshot promises. Save bank statements. If you feel too emotional to catalog, hire someone to organize it for you. A clean file makes a messy life litigable. 2. Don't go alone. A good lawyer and an accountant turned my anger into structure. They present your pain in a language the system understands, numbers and precedent. 3. Use the law to stop freeloading. Temporary injunctions, freezes, and court orders are not glamorous, but they are enforceable in a way social media outrage is not. 4. Avoid the temptation to humiliate publicly. It feels vindicating but can backfire legally and morally. Keep the drama out of it. Let the law be the amplifier. 5. Rebuild deliberately. Financial recovery is incremental. Pay off what you can. Reclaim your credit. Reestablish boundaries. These are small acts of revenge that matter more than any insult. Short reflective wrap-up. Betrayal taught me how thin civility can be and how fragile trust is. But it also taught me something more useful. That power comes not only from the courage to leave, but from the discipline to document and the patience to enforce. I didn't want him ruined as a person. I wanted him stopped from taking my life as payment for his mistakes. I wanted my accounts, my credit, my privacy, and my nights back. The law granted me that in a slow, careful way. If you've ever been betrayed and you dream of sweet justice, don't dream of spectacle. Build a case. Preserve evidence. Use the system to protect yourself. Revenge that ruins your life in the process isn't revenge, it's regret. If this story hit you, hit like. If you've got your own revenge tale, legal, clever, or just beautifully cold, and drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Behind Closed Doors for more real stories where the quiet, procedural kinds of justice get the job done. Thanks for listening.